holiday season, you might be looking for nutritious, convenient meals to keep you energized on jam-packed days. Factor, America's #1 ready-to-eat meal delivery service, can help you fuel up for brekkie, lunch, or dinner with chef-prepared, dietitian-approved, ready-to-eat meals delivered straight to your door. They just drop them at your door, people. You'll save time and eat well. You'll stay on track with your healthy lifestyle while taking all of your holiday to-dos in stride with good meals in the tum-tum. If you're too busy with all this stuff, these meals are easy to get done. They taste great. All you've got to do is head over to factormeals.com/expandingreality50 and use code expandingreality50 to get 50% off. That's code expandingreality50 at factormeals.com/expandingreality50 to get 50% off.
Grandma, can I have the chocolate chips?
This secret recipe moment made possible by Emory Heart and Vascular Center. When Grandma needed heart care, she came to Emory. The difference? Emory Healthcare performs more heart procedures annually than anyone else in Georgia, which means better outcomes for our patients. And we offer advanced and personalized treatments developed by our top specialists that others don't. Like Grandma knows, where you start your heart care matters. Smart Cookie. EmoryHealthcare.org/smartcookie.
A choice right now, between fear and love. It's just a ride.
Out of the dark night of ignorance and into the shining light of truth.
Expanding reality.
A population of citizens capable of critical thinking.
We don't see things as they are, we see them as we are.
There's a level of reality where everything dissolves into an ocean of energy.
We empower our experience by insisting on our authenticity.
That's very profound. Very.
Expanding reality.
Welcome to Expanding Reality Podcast. I am your host, Brandon Thomas. On this episode, I got a chance to sit down with Brent Raynes. He has written the book John Keel, The Man, the Myths, and the Ongoing Mysteries. Now, John Keel, of course, was into the interconnectivity of high strangeness. He wrote, of course, The Mothman Prophecies, there's many books. And our buddy here, Brent, was able to correspond and had him as a mentor, which is incredibly cool. Now, like Keel, Mr. Raynes is also involved in the idea of high strangeness being interconnected. We have a fantastic conversation, guys. This is one for the books. You guys just enjoy, so without any further ado, Brent Raynes. Okay, guys, very, very excited to have the amazing Brent Raynes on the show today. How are you, my friend?
I'm doing fine, Brandon. Appreciate it.
Well, like I said, it is an honor to meet you, sir. Your reputation is incredible. It's very hard to meet somebody and talk to several different seemingly disconnected people who all know you, who every single person has nothing but wonderful things to say about you, how smart you are, how kind and wonderful you are. So how do you cultivate a reputation like that straight out the gate? Let's just find that out.
Oh, okay. Well, I've let them know that the checks will be in the mail, and
see, this is part of your charm. This is part right here.
I just do the best I can and try to, be open about my research and try to network with others and build that reputation of being someone, other people can count on and not. Get all blown up about, my opinion is right and nobody else's counts,
Thank you. Yeah.
This is supposed to be about open and honest research and investigations and looking for answers. When you think you got the answer, that's probably when you better back up and re-examine your facts,
Yes.
Because this is a very complex phenomenon, and it's got so many different mixed elements in it. And, in the beginning, I read, I was 14 years old, just read Flying Saucers Serious Business by Frank Edwards. And I thought, I know the answer. It's probably extraterrestrial if it's anything nuts and bolts. And then after a couple of years reading writings of other authors like John Keel and Brad Steiger and Jacques Vallée, the French scientist, I realized, okay, there's other alternative possibilities. And so I got to open up a wider range of exploration here. And there's a lot of high strange crossover phenomena that occurs to experiences. And ufology in general has had to re-examine their motives over the years. I mean, like the repeater phenomena was considered the kiss of death by the Air Force and Dr. J. Allen Hynek and NICAP, the National Investigations Committee, one of the aerial phenomena, one of the major organizations that we had, civilian organizations that was started up back in 1956. And, if you had seen more than one UFO, they were considered, well, you probably are someone that's UFO should be a once in a lifetime event. That should not be something that you have a series of experiences. And so they were kind of shoved off to the side and discredited, because they thought, well, they're probably seeing lightning bugs or satellites or, misidentifying natural phenomena. And it turns out, thanks to various researchers over the years, like John Keel and Vallée and everyone, and then of course we had Bud Hopkins investigating the abduction phenomena and coming up with what Keel had really discovered in his own investigations years earlier, but had been pretty much ignored. Hopkins had a gentler version. He didn't get necessarily into some of the high strange areas that Keel did, so he became a little more accepted in the field of ufology. And so anyway, I went through what a lot of people go through when they first enter the field, and that's tunnel vision focus, where they're just looking for one thing, and you can end up being where that's the only thing you look for. And so thanks to those writers who kind of caught my attention. I was still young enough to work through things, not, I had a young mind and could be a little open-minded. I still struggle with things. It's hard to wrap your mind around some of this stuff, but
I think there's some insight and wisdom that comes with age, though, man. You've had the time to look at the phenomena, and you've had the time to look at it through multiple vantage points. And I think the fact that you were so influenced by Steiger, by Vallée, especially Keel, and we'll talk about that in a minute, it says to the point of that you got beyond the nuts and bolts pretty early on. I mean, you were considered a ufologist by the age of 14, and by 17 you were communicating with Keel. So it's interesting to me how you hit on like 12 levels ahead of where most people start. And there's people I still talk to that have been looking at the phenomena for decades, and they still are hardline nuts and bolts. It's coming from this specific star system. They may have changed their minds on the star system, but that's where they, have planted their flag, and that's fine. I think, like you, I do tend to think that it definitely goes beyond it, especially with all the ancillary high strangeness phenomena associated with it. Also something I want to get to here in a minute. But so you and I met through me getting a hold, or Barbara and Lynn actually getting a hold of me, and they wrote the book Convergence. I read your section in there on it, and then contacted you immediately. I was like, I have got to talk to this guy. And again, it's just like with them, both of them, with Bob Davis, with everybody that I've talked to, love you. So like I said, I'm looking forward to this. This has been a special one for me. So your book, though, John Keel, The Man, the Myths, and the Ongoing Mysteries, is awesome. You sent me a copy of it, and it is very well written. The things that you cover in there are incredible. It's the scope, the high strangeness scope, which is what I'm really excited to talk to you about. So how did you get involved with Barbara and Lynn specifically?
Okay, well, a few years ago, I guess about 2016, I was doing an interview because I have my online monthly magazine, Alternate Perceptions, and it comes out once a month on the first of each month, and I do one or two interviews with fellow researchers, experiencers, for each issue. And I did an interview with Ray Hernandez, and of course I was already interested in the whole UFO contact experiencer phenomenon. And anyway, I had read about him, so I arranged an interview, and he was telling about his organization, which was doing a extensive survey of experiencers. And I looked at the survey. It had hundreds of questions, and my survey instrument was much briefer, but I had all the various high strange crossover type questions, but his was far more extensive, and he had all these PhD people and such working on it. So anyway, he invited me to attend one of his Zoom meetings, and I did, and then he invited me another one, and pretty soon I knew I was going to be working with them instead of being a lone wolf like I had been, pretty much. So, and that's how I met Barbara Lynn and Bob and some others, that worked in the organization. And of course, each time I made a connection, I'd pull them in and interview them in my magazine, as you're doing with me right now.
Yeah. I read about you, contacted you, and here we are.
Yes, networking is wonderful stuff.
It's so cool. And to the Soul Tribe element of it, Alternate Perceptions was a name that I shopped for this show. That was one that those specific 2-word combination was one that I wrote down for this show before I settled on, before Expanding Reality was obviously the pick. So that's pretty cool. We kind of coalesce in that way. I would have found your publication, though, and probably just gone with something else after that. But so the work that you do is incredible, man. Like I said, you're so thorough. The research that you do is fantastic. So tell me how your book came about.
Well, I didn't intend initially to write about a book about Keel, but it just dawned on me a few years back that I was so heavily influenced, I would write one. I was actually intending to just write a brief one, and I contacted a person who published books, and they wanted it bigger. So I thought, well, instead of just being a bio, I'm going to also interview other people who knew Keel and use some of my own case evidence and expand it to the ongoing mysteries, not just what Keel reported, but show that what he reported is still out there, and we need to further look into it, research and investigate it. And so I presented it to this person, and then they told me, well, they weren't doing that now. So then I presented it to Rosemary Guiley, who did a very thorough editing job. And in fact, she encouraged me she knew Keel, and she contributed a foreword. And I interviewed her about Keel, and she suggested some other people that I interviewed, like Michael Grosso. And I also found out about one of his literary agents, Sandra Martin, who used to live in New York City, and she and Keel used to get together regularly for lunch on Thursdays. They would go down the street to a little restaurant on the first floor of an old hotel where a bunch of magicians would gather, because Keel was a big fan of magic. In fact, he almost went into the field of being a stage magician instead of becoming a writer, but he got to writing for a local paper, doing a column back when he was a young teenager. Might have started when he was about 12, called "Scraping the Keel," and the editor of this paper, he liked Keel's writings so well that he paid him like $2 a month for, back then that was probably pretty good pay.
Probably.
And then he decided, when he was 17, with 75 cents in his pocket, he hitchhiked his way to New York City and got a room, I think near Times Square, and started writing for magazines, writing for radio stations, and things, and just continued on writing.
Yeah. And then, God, man, the books that dude has put out. So for my audience that doesn't know John Keel very well, do you mind just summing him up just a little bit for everybody out here, and then we'll move on?
Okay. Well, he was a freelance journalist, and he, had an interest in many areas. It's kind of hard to sum the guy up because of so many moving parts, That's
why I was going to have you do it.
But he thought that going to the Big Apple, New York City, that was where, there were a lot of publishing houses and editors and such. And he, that was the best place to be. He didn't want to stay where he was being raised in upstate New York, where there was, just the his family wanted him to be, join the farm, and help with the cattle and farming activities, and he wanted to be a writer. So he did that, and he got pretty successful at it. And then during the Korean War, I think it was 1951. He was born in 1930, by the way. In 1951, he got drafted, and they sent him to Frankfurt, Germany, where they had this broadcasting, Armed Forces radio broadcasting station, and they put him to work there, and he did a regular program about travel in Europe and such. And he actually did various programs that showed his interest in going to Egypt and spending the night in the Great Pyramid there, and doing a live broadcast. I think, lights out, here I am. And also he had Frankenstein's Castle over in Germany. He had he set it up where this guy went out with a microphone and was giving a live report of being outside the castle one night. Unbeknownst to him, as he's describing the details of the castle and such and the history, someone snuck up on him to scare him, live. And anyway, this is where he got interested in going to different countries. For a while, after he got out of the service in 1954, he was a radio correspondent in various countries, and Germany and Paris and Barcelona, and then in 1954 he trekked off for several months across the countryside there into going through India and Pakistan, ending up in Singapore, and he wrote a series of articles, and then he later turned them into a book called Jadoo, Mysteries of the Orient, which, I didn't even realize till I was reading his, later after reading his first UFO books, that he had written a book back in 1957 where he was actually very skeptical of the occult and various mysteries, and he went over and would find out how they did these tricks, some of these performers that would do these things for the tourists, saying, I have the great power. I can put a blindfold on and I can drive this bicycle through the streets. Yeah. And anyway, he learned a lot of their tricks. But in the process, he also came away realizing that, hey, there are some things that can't be explained. He was curious about the Yeti because he was traveling through India, and there was footprints, and he heard this call that the local natives said was the Yeti version of Bigfoot, and I thought at one point he might have seen one on the other side of a lake. The locals said, "Oh, that's the Yeti," but he couldn't be absolutely sure because he said it could have been a bear, But the belief was strong, and he would come into a village right after one had been spotted. He actually met a priest that he, had been told was this Lama was very, very holy, very psychic, and he had been looking for this guy. And then one day he's hiking, and suddenly this guy comes up to him and introduces himself to him, and it's the guy that Keel had been looking for unsuccessfly. And Keel, said, well, I've heard a lot about you, and can you give me a demonstration? And says this old man has a walking stick, and he just sort of gets up on the walking stick and just kind of like he's hovering there, during their long conversation. He said he couldn't imagine how strenuous that should have been, Yeah. And meanwhile, he asked him how can you demonstrate your psychic powers? And the guy said, yeah, think of something. And so he says, okay, I'm thinking of something. He said, oh, come on, you can do better than that old pair of boots you're wearing, you know.
That is so cool.
And so then, he says, try something else. So he tried something else. And again, he was correct, And again, I think he admonished him saying, hey, you can do better than that. And so anyway, finally, Keel asked him, can you teach me how to do this? And he'd say, oh, this takes years. But he can say, I can give you a kind of an overview. You kind of visualize or imagine you're going down this long path. And as you're going down this path, various things will appear to you. And you pay attention to the things that appear to you, And one time he was in a temple, and this monk was going to, he was, I think, sitting in front of a Buddhist statue, and he was going to call in the spirits. And Keel is sitting there and thinking, okay. And he said, all of a sudden, this wooden little three-legged stool comes out of a dark corner, and it circles him. And Keel bends over and he moves his hands around it, looking for a string, some explanation. And he said, meanwhile, there was some kind of a noise on the roof, and there was a wind blow out a candle, and then the stool scurried back to another corner, after which he, the session was over, and he went over and examined the stool, and he could find no explanation for, how that was done. And Keel by this time was, pretty good at magic. He was, when he would go different places, he would often entertain the locals and kids, by doing card tricks and such, and making a key disappear or whatever, And so anyway, years later, he moved back to New York City after his overseas excursions. And during the 1966 wave of UFO activity that occurred, he just thought he'd like to look into that, because when he was in Egypt, he saw a disc-shaped domed object in 1954, and he knew they were real. He visited the Pentagon. He was going to write a big article for Playboy, but Dr. Hynek beat him out of it. But and of course, Dr. Hynek was, the former Air Force consultant, Project Blue Book. And so anyway, but he had about a 2-hour interview with this Project Blue Book representative. And the guy told him, Mr. Keel, there's nothing to this UFO stuff. It's just a waste of your time. And Keel says, no, I saw one of these things myself. So, you can't tell me that. And plus, Timothy Beckley did an interview, I think around 1984 with Keel, where you can actually see way back in his early background that he actually was aware of UFO and paranormal, as we call them today, events. His grandparents' farmhouse, he spent a lot of time there, and there was a poltergeist activity when he was a young man there, and there was rapping on the wall, and he'd try to rap back to try to, work out some kind of a message system to communicate. Some of the farmers in the area reported a gorilla scaring people, running across the road there when he was about age 10. And he says when he was age 7, he was riding through the countryside with his mother and his stepfather at that point. And they thought there was a barn on a hilltop that was on fire. And as it started rising up higher, this bright light, and it turned out to be a round sphere. And it hovered there a while, and then it just took off and disappeared. And he said that experience was, burned into his brain cells. Yeah. And so when this wave of sightings happened in 1966, he had just sold a book and sold about 800,000 copies, and he had some money in his pocket, so he decided he was going to get into investigating UFOs. And like me and a lot of others at the beginning, he thought it's ET, and after about a year of looking into it and traveling around and talking with a lot of people, he decided it was a little more complex. And I think that his experience earlier with the UFO and the paranormal stuff, and even the gorilla, which was, helped to clue him in, and of course his experiences over in the East.
Yeah, nothing like a giant gorilla to shake your perceptions a little bit. Now, I want to get into why Keel felt the way that he did, and the conclusion that you've come to, and the one that I'm a little bit on board with as well. But I want to talk about how you and Keel used to correspond. So what I like about your early interaction was you started to reach out and you wanted to know about UFOs. And he wrote you back encouraging you to instead familiarize yourself with the medical and psychiatric studies instead before you started UFOs. So was that significant?
Yeah, that was, he said to kind of study the medical psychiatric studies of, religious visionaries and such, and also parapsychological literature. And because he felt that it was far, far more complex. And in fact, he, in his writings, as well as Ballet, mentioned about like Fatima, Portugal, that event there, the Dance of the Sun back in 1917 was really had many elements of a classic UFO encounter. And there was a series of interactions with these young children. And so he became interested in a lot of the religious phenomena and their possible associations with the modern UFO contact experience. And in fact, I wrote a chapter for, the free organization Beyond UFOs, and my chapter 13, my lucky number, was on, a lot of the Marian apparitions and how they're the similarity to, the UFO contact experience and such. So, it was very good advice. And of course, I never got into being a psychologist or psychiatrist myself, but I've always networked with people. One of my early correspondents, really from about 1973 until he passed in 2010, was Dr. Berthold Schwartz, who was a psychiatrist, originally from Montclair, New Jersey. He eventually retired to Vero Beach, Florida. But I met him twice, and we corresponded extensively. And when I was out doing my own field work and such, I would write to him about my own cases to get his own thoughts on them, And I even called him up one time. We had a case in Maine of two young men who described they felt they'd had a UFO encounter with missing time. And so I called him up on the phone, and he actually drove up from New Jersey to Maine, where I was living at the time, to look into the case, and wrote it up for Flying Saucer Review over in England, which was a pretty prestigious magazine that carried reports from all over the world. Many people who were investigators would submit their findings on different cases to that magazine, and then later he took that and my own article that was in Flying Saucer Review to put it in his book, a 2-volume book entitled UFO Dynamics, which Keel said was one of, he wrote in Fate magazine, was one of the best of books out there. And then he'd complain that it was ignored by the UFO buffery. Dr. Schwartz actually was brought into the field by John Keel because in 1968, Dr. Schwartz, whose interest was really in parapsychology, he wrote an article from a medical journal, and it was on 4 cases that he had come across of people claiming to have seen UFOs. And in one case afterwards, there was poltergeist activity with one of the witnesses. And it made Paul Harvey's broadcast. And so Keel picked up on it and contacted Dr. Schwartz. And Dr. Schwartz was intending this to be his swan song. After writing that one article about UFOs, he was going to go back to psychiatry and parapsychology. And Keel wrote him and essentially told him that there's plenty for you to do in the UFO field. And don't worry, you'll still have parapsychology things to look at, And so they became quite well acquainted. And well, I never met Keel in person. I did meet Dr. Schwartz in person, and but I gained a lot from both of their knowledge and insight into this, I feel.
There's a lot of serendipity that's wrapped up into your story and how you got started in this. So there's a lot of like synchronicities, as he would say, just kind of like he told you, just pick up, or like that guru told Keel, just pick up on things along the way. I think the universe does that for you. The universe will drop little hints, depending on what you think our reality is. There's these little acorns along the way that allow you to kind of shift the direction of your life as long as you're willing to pay attention to them. And then, of course, confidence is just a series of successes. After you've gotten a few successes, following those trails and them leading you to the next, and then to the next, then it just becomes the way that the world communicates with you. It's an interesting phenomena in itself, synchronicities by themselves. So the fact that you were even corresponding with Keel, that Dr. Schwartz took you on, and you guys just you hit it off right away. And then Keel even gave you some pointers. He said, okay, look, we've already covered this part of it. Just start here and then move on from there. And so you're able to almost, how ancient structures are built on the, like Baalbek and stuff, how they're built on top of old structures from the previous civilization. Then you were able to kind of do that with your knowledge and your studies in UFOs as well, and into the phenomena, because yes, it is not just about UFOs. So one of the interesting things that I find with Keel, especially Valet yourself, is the interconnected nature of high strangeness and how it's all connected. This is the part Hynek got to there at the end as well with Sufos. You find that a lot of people, if they're going to look at the UFO phenomena as a whole, this is the inevitable conclusion, right? That there, number one, is no conclusion, but number two, it's not just one thing. It's all associated together. It's all tied in. So with that, there's self-imposed boundary lines that you talk about with the cryptozoologists, parapsychologists, the ghost hunters, ufologists even as well. What do you think needs to happen next for all of us to kind of come together? Because just like you point out in your book, cryptozoologists want to just look at chupacabras and stuff. They don't want to look at how maybe a paranormal phenomena is associated with a beast or a ghost or an entity, and then how that also correlates to some poltergeist activity and perhaps even a UFO sighting or an entity sighting as well. So how do you think we combine these elements? Do you just get all these guys in a room? It's kind of like a cryptozoologist, a parapsychologist, and a ghost hunter all walked into a bar. I mean, is that how this starts? Is some kind of weird, bad joke?
Well, I think it's of course, not everybody's going to comply with that approach, but I think they need to consider it, maybe try it, to compare notes with people outside of their own little niche there, and consider the implications. I think seems like more and more people are kind of taking that initiative here of late. I recently discovered there's even a paraanthropology newsletter out there.
That's cool. Yeah.
And just to have these multidisciplinary kind of exchanges, compare notes, and kind of be like an anthropologist or a social scientist, a mythologist, a folklorist, and try to go past some of the boundaries that we've imposed in the past, and look at, because like you pointed out, and I've seen this happen, that someone will be investigating a UFO case and they say, "Oh, and I saw a Bigfoot." Well, that's not my field, that's
yes.
somebody else's, and if every, I was Albert Rosales down in Miami, Florida, has collected thousands and thousands, cataloged a lot of cases from all over the world, and he's written quite a number of books now that from different time periods. And I told him, I said, this is fascinating, all these stories of landed UFOs and the beings get out and all this. But, with all those stories, we're looking at the main story that caught somebody's attention. Maybe it was published in a newspaper or the investigators. But how many times has anybody actually followed up on it and asked them, hey, what other unusual experiences, not UFO, but just unusual experiences, and got some history on these people, and maybe followed them, for a number of years to see if, anything else happens to them, followed up on their experience. I know that the reason I ended up being in touch with Dr. Swartz was because there was a woman in Florida that I had met, and she was a fellow researcher and an experiencer who had a close encounter followed by poltergeist activity and eventually entities appearing in her home. And she had written to John Keel and Dr. Swartz, and so she was the one who actually put me in touch with Dr. Swartz. It was, a fellow researcher and experiencer. And at the time I met her, I was in the Navy. My ship was home ported, a destroyer escort at Mayport, Florida. And her husband was actually in the Navy, and she lived right on base. I remembered before I went into the service that I had corresponded with someone in that area, but I had no idea that she had a P.O. box in another city, but actually she was right there on the base I was. So, talk about serendipity or synchronicity. I'm thinking I'm in the Navy. I'm not going to have any UFO field work to do, whatever. I'm committed to this. And actually the redirections that happened in my life often put me in places that I probably never would have arrived at and were very deeply meaningful, And so while I was there, the flap of 1973 erupted. I even took a plane out to New Orleans and got with a researcher out there that Ramona, the lady in Mayport, had told me about, Milton Scott, and he drove me over to Pascagoula, and I met Hickson and Parker and visited the site where they said the abduction occurred just 10 days after it allegedly happened, Damn. And while we were investigating a sighting of a woman who had seen two disc-shaped objects 2 nights in a row near a Jacksonville Naval Air Station, just down the road from there, Ramona thought to ask, I'm still a little wet behind the ears, and she says, ma'am, have you... I'm paraphrasing, had any other unusual experiences? And she says, no. And then it sunk in a while. She said, well, there was a time, it really scared me. A friend had died, and then suddenly his voice was on the phone and saying he's coming to the house. And I start crying. I say, no, don't come to that. And said it sounded just like him. And then telling about being in a seance, and she saw this apparition. And then there was another story, and it was one right after the other. And so that really made me realize, that you need to ask not just about the UFO, but to open people up about other experiences. Of course, Ramona knew this because she was an experiencer herself. Since childhood, she had had experiences of spirits and such. And then this UFO encounter in 1967, that was just another anomalous rung on the ladder, and then she was able to, thanks to Keel, kind of put together the whole UFO poltergeist thing that happened afterwards. And she wrote to him really to get some, she was concerned because she was having these experiences with balls of light and entities coming into her room, always around 3:00 in the morning. And then her son would come into her room. She hadn't said, she said, anything to her son. And then suddenly he was describing that there were these dark figures and they were threatening him, and he was scared. So he wanted to come and sleep in her bed that night, He was a young teenager. And anyway, that's how, and it's just so curious how all of these things, like I say, start because you think, oh gosh, I'm way down here and I'm in the Navy and I'm way, way away from what I really want to do. And of course, as I told you, that would have been in 73 and 74. And it was in 1975 when I got out of the Navy. I was still out of active duty. I was still going to reserve meetings, but I could travel around the country and interview people. And I went from Maine to Florida, spent most of the summer on the road in 75, and and met a lot of people in different states, Indiana, Ohio, Pennsylvania, and Tennessee, and Florida, and then back to Maine eventually. But of course, as it ended up, I ended up back here in Tennessee. Yeah. I one of the people that I was in contact with, a young lady, had seen a UFO, and also there was a local columnist for a paper who was carrying UFO stories. So I came down here and met him, and anyway, one thing led to another, and got married in late 77, and man, there's people I've met down here that the stories are incredible. If it hadn't been for when I thought I was going the wrong way, it turned out to be the right way. It reminded me of an author who's passed away, and a lot of people don't remember him now. He was a psychic researcher named Harold Sherman, and he wrote a lot of books, of which I think I got about 7 on a bookshelf in the next room. He had what he called ESP Research Associates organization out of Little Rock, Arkansas, and he wrote books on psychic phenomena, ESP abilities. He gave instructions on how to do out of the body experience. He had one or two himself, and he wrote about a lot of people's experiences like that, and a lot of his own experiences, as Barbara and Lynn did with their convergence. And one of the things he'd say was, to focus in your mind what you want to accomplish, because like attracts like in the realm of mind. And so I became so obsessed, I think, with UFOs, I couldn't help but think that maybe, like attracts like, and even when I thought that I was, I'm in the Navy now, I'm going to have to put this UFO thing on hold. Nah, it didn't work out that way at all. I was still quite active, and I don't think it would have been near as exciting if I hadn't gone into the Navy at the time.
Well, I do have to say, firstly, thank you for your service. I have a high reverence for folks that join the military, because that's I think one of the bravest things you can do. I don't necessarily always agree with the reason that those resources are utilized, but I do have a high reverence and a separation between the war and the individual. So thank you again, sir, for your service. I honestly, bottom of my heart, appreciate it.
Thank you.
And you say like attracts like. That's one of my favorite podcasts, actually. There's a guy named Pat Mahan. He runs that one. He has been on the show. We're doing quite a bit. We've got a bunch of big things coming up in the future. His podcast is called Like Attracts Like. See, this is another synchronicity here, brother.
Yes, it is.
Interesting geographically where you're at. Have you ever heard of an author named Trey Hudson?
Yes, the Meadow Project, I think is the book.
Yes.
I haven't read it yet, but it sounds quite intriguing, and it sounds like maybe the site is down close to Jacksonville, Alabama, which my friend Dr. Dr. Greg Little,
yes,
has included in one of his books on Alabama sites, and my family and I went down to follow up on what he'd written. There's a lot of interesting ancient native sites down there that where they used rocks to make walls and round prayer circles and such, or we can only speculate with something. Well, there's even a large stone effigy of a serpent. I think it's like 170 feet long or something, and there's lots of sites. And so I've kind of wondered if maybe, I think that his the activity around his property is they've compared it to the Skinwalker Ranch, is kind of maybe down in that area. And it's interesting about Kielfeld. A lot of the ancient sites were where a lot of these paranormal and UFO things occurred. And we've kind of been, Greg and I have both been interested in this. Greg, I've known him since I really started Alternate Perceptions as a little newsletter back in 85, and he's been contributing and helping me with that whole effort. In fact, in 93, besides just writing articles, he said, I'll become a co-editor and publisher for you. And we started out with this magazine here. And this was like up to 68 pages. But when we saw that everybody was going to the internet, well, that's where we moved to as well. But at the time, we had distributors across the United States and up into Canada, and we really wanted to, recreate the Fate magazine formula, where we didn't just deal with the UFO, which was our burning interest when we first met, but also Greg has also written an encyclopedia on ancient Native American Indian mounds and earthworks, and he's very interested in that and very interested in Keel. So we had all these common things, and that's another thing. If I hadn't ended up in Tennessee, he lived over in Memphis, and we would have probably never met. And we've been awesome partners in a lot of different projects over the years.
He's so interesting. I've got one of his books back here right next to Trey Hudson's The Meadow, because I've had Trey on the show, which is why I asked you about it. And it's kind of, it's his area is kind of in your area. It's not too far away. I've been sworn to secrecy. I can't tell you exactly where it's at. And I honor that, right? We don't want a bunch of yahoos going out there and screwing the place up. But
No.
yeah, and Greg is somebody I would love to have on, man. He's fascinating. I've got a list of folks, of course, and he's on it. And just the second I go to the next person, like 15 more pop up, and I'm like, oh God, I just got to talk to everybody. I just love this. It's just one of the coolest things ever. So let's talk about the gin a little bit, because I think that idea and that concept plays a lot into, or can explain a lot of what's going on. So if you don't mind, just break down the gin for us.
Well, yeah, the jinn was the Muslim that mentioned in the Quran. They were considered, I think, the third order of creation. There was an Anne Druffel over in California who actually, I interviewed her, and she kind of explored the idea of the jinn. She had actually met some Muslim people who claimed to have encountered the jinn. And there were other ufologists, including Rosemary Guiley, who helped edit my book and who was actually wrote the forward and knew Keel, and she wrote about the jinn and thought that they were actually connected with the UFO phenomena, and actually a lot of times ghost hunters, she felt, who think they're dealing with haunted houses and the spirits of the dead are actually dealing with a jinn type phenomena. And even Gordon Crichton, former editor of the Flying Saucer Review in England, actually took the jinn thing quite seriously as well. And they were supposed to be beings who actually at one time lived, I understand, here on the earth, and for one reason or another are now in another dimension, and they kind of are jealous and would like to work their way back to where we are.
The grass is always greener, man. They had a sweet deal here, and they screwed it up.
Yeah. And then, of course, Keel was heavily into the elementals, and there was actually I presented Rosemary with a quote that he had said that the jinn was just another variation of many, and was essentially meaningless. And she disagreed with that, but she said she felt the jinn were real, but she said there are probably many different levels, many different dimensions with different beings. So, she could kind of agree with them on that. They had similar views, but when it came to the jinn, they kind of, and that's in my Keel book where I interviewed her and we discussed the jinn element there. But I had, a great deal of respect for all these researchers, and certainly, Anne Druffel, I have a quote from the interview I did with her where she actually commented on the jinn and the elementals, and covered, and unbelievably, she didn't know who John Keel was when I brought his name out. So, she's working all this same, she started out as a NICAP investigator back in the 50s, and she wrote a book on abductions, and that was how I got in touch with her. And lo and behold, she didn't know who John Keel was. So
wow.
I'm trying to keep his name in the field as best I can.
You're doing a great job, because it needs to be, right?
Yeah, I mean, you don't have to agree with everything that Keel. I mean, I don't necessarily either. I don't even sometimes know what exactly to think of all this, but I do. I do want to keep an open mind and explore the full terrain, the full landscape of this thing.
I think that's what needs to happen, so you don't get pigeonholed into these people who plant their flag and then spend the rest of their days defending that or trying to disprove the connection between anything else, or say that the cryptozoologist people, it's like a weird gang thing. It's like these people just have these little cliques that they want to stay in, and like these echo chambers of reinforcing ideas that only enforce their ideas. But that's what separates people like Keel and yourself from that's an outside perspective. I think it's the most honest perspective, really, because those generally, if I'm generalizing here, the people who just have very hardline, this is what the phenomena is, are very loud about it, and they're very, got to prove it to the bitter end, man. But folks like I'm not going to consider us in the same perspective because you're beyond that. But I think that what the kind of research you do and the kind of research that I'm starting to do is, you get to that point to where you understand that it's all connected. There's something bigger. And the second that you look at it, it changes form and jumps ahead of you. It jumps conceptually ahead of what we can comprehend. And it's been doing this since the beginning of time. Which is why it's interesting, the whole jinn phenomena, because they're tricksters. They're associated with the genies. They're just kind of crappy entities, to be honest with you, from my research. But what's interesting about this whole damn thing and mediumship and UFOs and the whole phenomena itself is that it could be, and I'm not ruling it out here, just one entity screwing with everybody. It's just a bunch of trickster gods screwing with everyone. They appear as fairies, gnomes, Bigfoots, poltergeist activity, ghosts, UFOs, anything that they can do to be mysterious and separate themselves from the reality in which we're tethered to. And it seems like, now I tend not to think that it's all one thing, but it's a possibility that all we're dealing with here are just some assholes trying to get back to this plane.
Or it could also be the trickster might actually be a kind of teacher, looking from some Native American point of views that I've heard. In fact, I had consulted with a revered medicine man one time about some of my own experiences, because I've been in sweat lodges and such and visited some ancient sites, and I had a Indian blanket that I didn't know where it came from in the house here, and as I'm looking at it, saying, where did you come from? I don't recognize you. You're not really from here. And it disappeared before my eyes, and it just slowly, it's on top of this dresser, and I had seen it about a month before, and I thought, my wife just threw that up there. And I turned the light out and went to bed, and then in the morning it wasn't there, so I kept thinking, I blew that,
Yeah.
and then it, one night I wake up and there it is on top of the dresser and dresser drawers, and it's on the very top. It's folded, I think, a little differently, but it's definitely, I sit up in bed, I had turned on the light. For some reason I woke up and there it is. And I stretch my arms out. I think, okay, go like this. I pinch myself. Okay, I am wide awake. That hurt. And so I said,
scientific.
And I want to go over to it, but it's as happened before, I talked myself out of it. I actually was kind of scared because this just shouldn't be, it's definitely a Native American type designs on it. And so I just, thought, well, I guess this is what happens to you when you're doing this stuff too long. But as I'm looking at it, it's like looking at something through a telescope or under a microscope. It starts to blur, but it's the only thing in there, and nothing else blurs, just the blanket. And eventually it blurs and it's just no longer there. And it was just a kind of an interesting experience. So anyway, I had told this medicine man about it, and and he says, well, they could be trying to test your intuitive abilities. It could be a mischievous spirit that is playing tricks on you, or it could be trying to test your intuitive abilities and try to teach you something, and but he says to be smudging, sage yourself after something happens and go into a meditative, contemplative state, see if you get some kind of a message or something.
Yeah. And make sure you guys open windows and doors whenever you smudge. Don't just smudge because then the spirit just runs around your house. It needs a place to escape, right? Not a lot of people know that. A lot of people just getting into smudging now, and so they need that information. So, you know, it may be, so the blanket may be like step 2 on Trickster God training. You know, maybe there's just some university of Trickster Gods out there, because I think step 1 would be the right sock, you know, or one of the pair of socks, right? Because you always lose those. And then step 2 is a damn blanket. And then who knows, you know, you just graduate from there.
Yeah. And at the time it was several years before I even told anybody that happened, you know, but now I figured, heck, I ask all these other people to tell me their stories. So
it's very interesting. And I like the idea that it is honing your intuition, almost like a spiritual Austin Powers. Remember when he punches that lady because he's like, it's a man, baby, and it really was a dude. Now, he wasn't so good on that when he was unfrozen. Spoiler alert, guys. But it's kind of like a way to test your intuition. It's a way to kind of calibrate your senses to your environment on what is real and what is not, which is very interesting, man. I like that concept a lot. So another quote that you had in your book by Tim Beckley, whenever he was referring to John Keel, he asked him, so you've triumphed at the end. And of course, Keel just replied, we have only opened Pandora's box. Instead of solving the mystery, we've created many new ones. I mean, man, and he's absolutely right. And this is the phenomena, right? The second that you think that you figured something small out about it, 15 things pop up that are new, or 1,000 things, and they take you in all these new directions. And it really does mess with you. It's a way to calibrate your intuition. Maybe that's all that is as well. The whole damn thing. It's interesting, man. Like I said, I love your work. I'm going to be definitely linking your book in the show notes here. So we'll probably wrap it up here pretty soon, but I wanted to ask you, in your book as well, you talked about what John Keel, the bizarre event that he had left out of Mothman Prophecies that you discovered in 2015. Do you mind elaborating on that?
Yeah, there was a gentleman that he had known. In fact, in the Mothman Prophecies, he describes how the guy showed up at his apartment the night that the Silver Bridge collapsed, and that Silver Bridge collapsing kind of figured into various people's, and in Point Pleasant, West Virginia, their premonitions that something was going to happen. It seemed to be related to the river. Mary Hire, the newspaper lady who he met there in Point Pleasant, described how there were Christmas packages in the Ohio River, and people were, you know, crying, screaming, and such. And then on December 15th of 1967, it happened. You know, the bridge collapsed, and there were Christmas packages and floating on the Ohio River. And you know, he said that was a very significant event. But the thing was that, and what he didn't put in his book, for, you know, I'm not sure why he talked about it with different people. And this guy that first time I had heard the story, he was one of the people I was interviewing about Keel for the book. And he shared with me a story that Keel had told, which he sent me the actual letter, a copy of the letter that Keel wrote when he discovered this out. The guy had been a friend of his since, you know, he was best man at his wedding, I think, in 1950. And so he'd known him a number of years, but he hadn't seen him in a while. And suddenly he shows up at his apartment, and he's sitting there, and got the TV on, and suddenly the news comes out about the bridge collapse on the Ohio. And you know, it's startling to Keel, and he's upset, and you know, like this is confirmation that, you know, these people having these experiences, these dreams, it was building up to this, and you know, he was upset that the intelligence didn't reveal the exact details, so that maybe somebody could have done something to prevent it, you know. And so he saw that as very negative. But anyway, this friend was there, and they conversed. You know, they got, you know, it'd been, I think, several years before they'd been in touch. And they even stepped out to go have lunch and afterwards, and maybe that's actually before. And then they went to a Jim Moseley talk somewhere in Manhattan there. And I tried to get with people. I mean, this was back in, 1967. And, a lot of those people are gone. I thought, every time somebody gets together and does a talk, there's pictures, Well, of course, a few years later, I think over 2 years later, Keel writes in this letter to this guy who was in the apartment that night and said, yeah, he was a big, tall guy, had a powerful handshake, he saw the guy's wife at Macy's and said, oh, I met your husband, a while back. How's he doing? And anyway, they got talking, and she says he passed away. He died. He says, when? It says in July 1965, heart attack. He says, that can't be. I saw him in December 1967, and said she got rather indignant. She says, you sure about the date, the year? And she says, John, don't you think I was there? Don't you think I'd know? And he said she got rather upset with him, And so that was quite an anomaly. And I talked with a couple of other researchers who had spent quite a bit of time with Keel at the 2003, I think it was, Mothman Festival in West Virginia, Point Pleasant, West Virginia, which has become an annual event. And these two gentlemen, Tim and John Frick from Maryland, they spent a number of hours with him, and he mentioned this story and said that, described the same thing that I had heard from this other guy. And they said, he didn't mention the name, but he said, let's see. What do you think about that, John? And his response was that it hurts my head too much to think about it very much at all. That was just something that had been keeping him awake a number of nights. And that was Keel's response to it. Now, for a lot of people, there was this very negative thing, but then a person comes back from the dead and is so physical and has this guy's memories and is just as physical as you or I. That really blew his mind. And, for a lot of people, that would have just been a very deeply spiritual and positive paranormal event. But for Keel, it was, he had difficulty with it because he was thinking ultra terrestrials, they can imitate our voices, they can imitate our appearances. And he'd been, he'd often described himself as a lifelong atheist, although he would tell friends that, well, just to be on the safe side, I'll call myself an agnostic, really. But so I asked him once when we were talking on the phone, I says, what do you think about the Marian apparitions? What about angels and such? And he says, well, those always turn sour in the end. So he didn't really give him a real positive spin. So that's, I still want to find the positive in this,
Yes.
And I think that maybe sometimes you get the positive and the negative, and you've got to really try to find which one is really the thread that you really want to pull on, and which one helps you the most in your journey through this life.
And this is what the phenomena sounds like, right? It's just like our real reality. And this is what kind of anchors it to this reality in some ways, or allows it to interact with this reality, is that it's dualistic in nature. You've got you've got the positive benefits and the negative benefits, just like you said, the things that serve you, the things that don't serve you. People have positive and negative abduction experiences. It's this dichotomy. It's anchored in this reality, so of course it would be dualistic in nature. But it's still fantastical. It's still fascinating. So I would be remiss before we wrapped if I didn't ask what your opinion on the phenomena is. What do you think we're dealing with? What do you think's going on here?
Well, I kind of think in some ways it's a very, as I've already said, very complex. It's a real difficult one to wrap your mind around when you get into the total picture, the big picture, as it seems to be. And I think that Brad Steiger called it the other because he didn't know just what to call this. And I've kind of got the feeling here of late that we're going to learn kind of more about ourselves than the other. You know, eventually we may get to the other, but I think along the way we're going to find out more about ourselves, about human psychology and potential. And I think we have to use a great deal of discernment in this field because not everything is what it appears to be on the surface.
Perfect. You nailed it.
I'll stop right there.
Honestly, I didn't cut you off. That's it. Just stop. That was perfect. Brent Raynes, I can't thank you enough, man. I'll be linking all the ways, of course, to find you and your book in the show notes here. You guys know how to do this. Go down in the description, and there it is. My friend, I cannot thank you enough, man. Your Soul Tribe will have you back on. I think Bob earlier and I were talking about getting you and him and I together to do like a panel type of a conversation.
Okay, great.
That'd be fun, right? Okay. Well,
yeah, we've done something similar before, so
cool.
Awesome.
Well, let's do it the expanding reality way, and I'll have a bunch of cool sound effects and stuff that I'll just pepper in with no consequence whatsoever. Well, like I said, my friend, I can't thank you enough for your time. Thanks so much, man. Just enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.
Yeah, we'll stay in touch.
Awesome. You too, my friend. Take care.
I absolutely love talking to people like Brent. This is the reason that we do this. You just figure it all out. Let's just talk about everything and how it's all connected. This is the approach that the phenomena needs. You know, we do enjoy the people that plant their flag, and they're fun. They have some great ideas, and they do some wonderfully specific research. This, though, is where the next step in the phenomena is, in the interconnectivity of all of it. It's very important, and I'm grateful that Brent is out there doing the kind of work that he is doing. So, of course, all the ways to find him, guys, are linked down in the show notes. Go ahead and go down there. Get his book. It is great. It is a wonderful read. I know I'm recommending books for you guys all the time. Add this to your list because it's fantastic. So, the music that you are hearing is by good buddy Vinny the Saint. You guys check it out. His link tree is linked down below. He does some incredible music. Y'all show him some love. He's a good friend of mine. As far as this show goes, guys, you can find us at expandingrealitypodcast.com. That is where the links to all of the socials will be. The YouTube video of this conversation will be up on YouTube as well. There at the .com, you can find our Patreon. If you find that the show is valuable and you're like, man, this dude just needs money. I'm like, well, I don't need it, but I'll take it. You know, I'm grateful for everything. I live an abundant lifestyle, and I'm grateful for it. So thank you. This week, go out into your day while you were looking for the interconnectivity of all of this phenomena with your own two eyes. Go out into your day while you're at it and pick up a piece of litter. Smile at everybody that you meet. Buy a stranger a meal in line behind you. Become friends in that way. Just have a cup of coffee. If you see somebody sitting there by themselves having a meal or a cup of coffee, be nice. They might just want some alone time. See if you could join them and make some new friends. You will not believe how many people I've connected with simply doing that alone. It's fantastic. Just have fun with your reality. It's really, really cool out here. So as well, tack on petting a strange dog. You guys be great to all the animals that you come in contact with. They're wonderful and we do not deserve them. Get out of the left-hand lane while you're doing that. And finally, of course, the message of the entire show, guys. Explore the world around you. We live in an amazing place as long as you have eyes to see it. Go out into this amazing place and just be good to one another. Thank y'all so much for listening. We'll see you next time.
Grandma, can I have the chocolate chips?
This secret recipe moment made possible by Emory Heart and Vascular Center. When Grandma needed heart care, she came to Emory. The difference? Emory Healthcare performs more heart procedures annually than anyone else in Georgia, which means better outcomes for our patients. And we offer advanced and personalized treatments developed by our top specialists that others don't. Like Grandma knows, where you start your heart care matters. Smart Cookie. EmoryHealthcare.org/smartcookie.